Okay, so I think we're going to go ahead and start. We've given plenty of time for people to join, so hopefully numbers will start to stabilise now. So hello everyone, welcome to BBSRC's Applicant webinar for the second follow-on fund call of 2023. So my name is Faye Cheyenne and I'm a BBSRC Strategic Lead for Translation. So yeah, thank you for everyone that's joined. If you're interested in BBSRC Follow-on Fund, we run these webinars after the opening of each of our calls just to give potential applicants a little bit more detailed overview of the programme, the application process, and it's an opportunity for you to ask any questions. So there is a live Q&A feature on this webinar, so if you want to put any questions in there, then we'll try and answer some of them sort of during the webinar, and then we've got a time at the end to sort of address any of them live. So just on to the next slide. So I'm going to start the webinar off by giving a bit of background to BBSRC and our support for translation, why we support translation. Then I'll go on to talk specifically about follow-on funding and our call that is currently open. We also have a guest speaker here today, Professor Caroline Barelle, joining us. Caroline has both been a receiver of follow-on funding and has also sat on our FOF assessment committee, so she can speak from both sides of follow-on funding and tell you a bit more about her experiences and how FOF funding helped her. We'll then also have questions for her later on in the webinar, so yeah, if there's anything specific for her, please put it in the Q&A as well, and we can address those at the end. So moving forwards into the main slide deck, I'm just going to take you briefly over BBSRC as a whole and how we're structured, just to give you a bit of a feel for where follow-on fund lands in sort of our programme of support. So our overall vision is to advance the frontiers of biology and drive towards a healthy, prosperous and sustainable future. So our key priority areas for impact are sort of broadly categorised as transformative technology, sustainable agriculture and food, advanced manufacturing and clean growth, and an integrated understanding of health. And this includes plant and animal health as well as human health. So just to give you a better idea of where BBSRC's translational programmes sit within the overall structure of BBSRC, we're sort of broadly split into three domains, and these are research, strategy and programmes, strategic planning, evidence and engagement, and then the capability and innovation domain. And then we have a cross-cutting team, the research, innovation and funding delivery team, that essentially help drive all the delivery of our programs across BBSRC. So they're the ones that bring all of our programs to life and make sure that they can run and you can have access to everything. So to just go into a little bit more detail about the capability innovation domain, because that is where follow-on fund ultimately sits. That's further broken down into our skills and careers units. So they're responsible for things like doctoral training programs. We then have our business interaction unit, who deal a lot with industry and academic collaborations. And then we've got the knowledge exchange and commercialisation unit, which is a team that I sit in, and a number of my colleagues involved in follow-on fund sit in as well. So our priority is to help deliver social and economic impact from public funds that are invested into bioscience research. So we work in four overlapping areas, and these are translation, enterprise, innovation, capability and venture. So to enable conversion of research discoveries into pioneering products, processes and services, we have all these programs such as impact acceleration accounts and follow-on funding, which can be used at that sort of earlier stage, all the way through to large-scale technical development of your project. We also support the development of entrepreneurial skills and enterprise skills, and these are supported mainly through programs such as ICURE, which stands for Innovation to Commercialisation of University Research. And we also offer support for innovation seeking early stage investment through our partnership with UK Innovation and Science Seed Fund. So if you've got any more questions about any of these other programmes aside from follow-on fund, please feel free to contact the Knowledge Exchange Commercialisation Unit. Our email is going to be provided at the end of this slide deck. So yes, for the rest of this presentation, we'll sort of talk more specifically about follow-on fund. So next slide. So before I get into that, I just want to give a really brief overview of the team and sort of where we all sit. A few of these names you may be familiar with, and you may see in the future if you're interacting with follow-on fund and making an application. So David Hendry deals with the day-to-day management of the follow-on fund, and I work closely with David from an overall strategy side for the follow-on fund. James Phillips is on the call today, but he's our brand new head of BBSRC's translation and innovation capability. So he will be gradually transferring into this role from his current role in the business interaction unit. And then we have Nick Bassett, who is our Associate Director for Innovation, who provides all of the oversight for the activities of our team. And then from Research and Innovation Funding Delivery, we have Jane and Helen, who manage the delivery of the programme and deal with all the mechanics of the application and assessment process and ultimately make it work. So now moving on specifically to Follow-on Fund, it's designed to enable researchers to convert their intellectual assets into practical application to achieve that wider commercial and economic societal impact from public funded research. So for BBSRC Follow-on Fund, we provide up to 2 years of funding, and these projects can be anywhere between £100,000 and £800,000. There's a variety of activities that will be considered appropriate for follow-on fund, and these include early stage de-risking, prototype development, all the way through to full technical scale-up of a project to the point where you may be considering licensing and spinning out. So all projects will need to have a direct link to BBSRC follow-on funding, BBSRC funding, and have a clear understanding of their market opportunity and a clear programme of work with milestones that can demonstrate how the future application of the project can deliver benefit and impact to the UK. This can include international markets, but there still needs to be a tangible benefit to the UK, so it's really important that you demonstrate that in your application. I also want to take the opportunity now to highlight that translational funding grant calls are fundamentally different to responsive mode. They generally involve a much more structured application process. This application process is designed to help applicants clearly articulate their understanding of the market opportunity, a development plan, their route to the market, any wider benefits and any ethical considerations as well, not only within the project itself, but any ethical implications of their innovation. And this is part of a structured question set called the Common Commercialisation Question Set, which has been developed across UKRI. David will discuss a bit more of that in more detail with you shortly. We also encourage applicants to discuss with your technology transfer office before you make an application, just to make sure that you're at the right sort of readiness level to take on a follow-on fund application. As I mentioned, because they're so different to BBSRC responsive mode grants or any other kind of responsive mode funding, it is really important to sort of at least engage with them and get their sort of opinion on how ready you are to do this kind of programme. So I just mentioned there some of the criteria for follow-on fund and some of the things that you need to do to be eligible. I want to also note here some key changes that have happened to follow-on fund in this most recent call. Some of you may be familiar with follow-on fund. For some of you, it may be the first time you've ever heard of it. But for those who are familiar and have maybe applied to follow-on fund in the past, there's two key changes that have taken place. So we historically used to run two awards within the same call. So these were standard and super FOFs, where standards were up to £250,000 and super FOFs were anything between £250,000 and £800,000. And then for anything over 250, if you're applying for a super FOF, you also needed to undergo an additional peer review step. We are now combining both of these awards into one single award. So instead of running standard and super, it will just be follow-on fund. And the breadth of follow-on fund covers all the way down from £100,000 all the way through to £800,000, with the assessment being by a panel of experts only, who are our FOF committee, without the additional peer review step. So there's a few factors that have led us to the decision to remove peer review from follow-on fund. One being that super follow-on fund was initially much higher in value, so you could initially apply up to £2 million. Unfortunately, that's been reduced with budget cuts and things like that, and the additional peer review step was more of an assurance for a much larger chunk of money. And then alongside this, we also recognise that the cost of research has significantly increased, especially in the last few months. And what used to be called maybe a super is maybe not a super anymore. And there's also a lot of other internal processes and things to make it more easier accessible for the community in terms of reducing bureaucracy and shortening timelines for assessment periods. But please be assured that it will still undergo a very robust assessment process. We've expanded our FOF committee, our panel of experts that sit on the FOF committee, to mitigate any risks with removing the peer review step. So we'll continue to assess how that goes moving forwards. But yeah, so there is no longer a distinction between standard and super FOF. Another key change is our expanded eligibility criteria. So again, historically, in order to be eligible for follow-on funds, you would need to have prior peer-reviewed BBSRC funding. Again, it's an historical criteria that doesn't reflect the changes in the funding landscape. For instance, with that previous criteria, things like impact acceleration accounts and other types of BBSRC devolved funding and other programs are not eligible for follow-on fund. We really recognise that this is a gap in our pipeline. So we're now expanding our eligibility criteria to any prior BBSRC funding. So it doesn't have to be peer-reviewed funding. It could be IAA funding. It could have come from iCure. But you must still be in scope and remit. So please really carefully check this before making your application. And if you're in any doubt whatsoever, please just contact the BBSRC office, and we'd be more than happy to sort of help you decide if you're in the right place and got enough to do a follow-on fund application. And with that, I'll now pass on to David, who will take you through the details of this specific call and more information on the application and assessment process.
Thank you, Faith. So, so if you go on to the next slide, thank you very much. So yes, briefly, the call is up to 2.25 million per round. Opened on the 9th of August and closes on the 4th of October at 4 p.m. UK time. And as Faye mentioned, FOF applications are assessed by an independent panel, our FOF committee. And the anticipated date for the committee meeting is within February, so that'll be defined shortly. So going into the questions that we would seek for you to address in applying, we have these questions, as they mentioned already, we've developed across UKRI in partnership with our other councils. And the aim of those questions is to help provide clarity for applicants and what should be provided, and also for the committee in requesting what they will need to assess applications in this space. So we've got the key questions. So opportunity and market. So what's the opportunity or challenge you're seeking to address? Outlining that is important, and also having a good idea of understanding of the market and opportunity. So are there any competitors? What's the market size? Those sort of questions and things need to go into that. The development plan. So what is the technical work that you'll be doing, or what work we'll be doing within the follow-on fund? The route to market intellectual assets. So how will the proposed project progress the innovation or the technology towards the market? And the wider benefits. So beyond just the commercial opportunity, what are the potential societal, environmental, and economic benefits of the work you'll be doing? And then obviously taking into account any ethical considerations associated with the work that you're doing, and how those fit into any regulatory frameworks and legal aspects, if there's anything that touches on any things of ethical sensitivity. But you'll see that, so these are the headline questions, but once you go onto the FOF opportunity page, each section includes bullet points that provides further details of what we will be asking of applicants to provide. On to the, thank you very much. Next question, next slide. So working with partners is an important aspect of a follow-on fund proposal. So involvement of industry users is strongly encouraged, and it may be appropriate and necessary to work with external partners in order to progress the innovation, and including access to scale-up or capability to test the innovation within a real-world setting. But proposals which do not have project partners, we would expect them to clearly articulate how industry and users have shaped the project to date, and how they will be engaged in the future development of the project. We don't expect all applicants to have that involvement, so it's just clear, you need to provide that clear outline of understanding of, okay, have you spoken to users and customers, and to ensure that your project is geared towards truly meeting the needs of that market you're seeking to enter into. So alongside that, so what good looks like in a project. So a clear understanding of the customer need, and that feeds back to what I was just saying about making sure you've engaged with users and customers in developing your project. Having a clear development plan with milestones and deliverables outlined, and clearly outlining what the risks are, but also having an understanding of how you're going to mitigate those risks and taking the project forward. Clearly outlining how the work will help address the market opportunity, and where there are project partners, ensure that their contribution in the project is clear and defined. What parts of the project will they be involved in? What will they be providing, cash or in kind, or a combination of both, and how that fits into the project scope, and how that helps it going forward. So some common pitfalls. So a poor understanding of the customer need, like I mentioned, having a clear understanding of what they need is really important, and how this project will be addressing those needs. Trying to address too many opportunities within the scope of the project. So it's important to focus on the most appropriate opportunity for commercialization, and that can be from a number of different reasons. So one might be lower barriers to entry. So if there's a regulatory pathway that's quite difficult, is there another route? So for example, you may have a technology that could be beneficial both in the veterinary side of things, but also towards the human side of things. But if you go through to the veterinary side, there's lower barriers to entry, but it means that you've also proven the technology in that space. And then later on in the commercial space, you may be able to then address the other opportunity that's presented as well. Limited clarity around intellectual assets. Now, this is really important. It's important to ensure that you've outlined the current IP position. So what is the IP? Making sure who owns it. If you've done some work in the past that's been developed with others, having clarity about what IP your institution holds and what IP they hold is really important. But also outline how the foreground IP will be managed going forward. And yeah, again, around risks of the technical development. So it's important to address the risks head on. So what are they? What is the potential impact, and to outline how you're going to mitigate those potential risks and other routes to taking things forward within the project. So from this, I'll just hand over to Caroline to talk through her experiences of being within the FOF program, but also being a FOF applicant in the past.
Thank you, David. That was fantastic. Really, really helpful information and some good guidelines there. So crikey, I was looking back at the original application that we put in, and it was like over 10 years ago now. But it was a catalyst to the success that is still the company that I founded way back. And so I just wanted to touch a little bit on the technology, first of all, so to help you understand what we were working on and what our aspirations were regarding getting a super follow-on fund at the time. So I was within the University of Aberdeen, which is just a stone's throw away from where I am today. And we were working on a technology, and it was shark proteins, believe it or not, but sharks have antibody-like molecules called VNARs. And these VNARs are interesting, they're fascinating. They are single domain antibody-like molecules. And so fundamentally, they're a lot smaller than mammalian antibodies. They're a lot more robust because of the nature of the shark blood. And they're also intriguing when it comes to topology or shape. So there in the wee stick diagrams, you can see lots of different shapes. And they have the capacity and the capability of binding into different parts of target proteins. So a lot of really nice basic biology, a lot of really interesting facts about these molecules. They're part of the adaptive immune system of sharks, etc. So the university were working on these, and they realized that there was something interesting there. And they realized that when they did an immunization, believe it or not, of a shark, that these small antibody-like molecules responded to the antigen that was injected. So that was interesting and potentially could be commercially viable. But the question was, how could it be commercially viable? So if you could flick on to the next slide, please, Faye. So we had developed a number of these domains, and one of them was against albumin, human serum albumin. We'd actually injected animals with human serum albumin, and we'd identified these domains. Now, the reason that that's interesting is that albumin increases the systemic half-life of small proteins, small molecules, peptides, anything like that. And what we essentially had, in essence, was a potential platform, a technology platform of these small antibody-like molecules. But a challenge with something small is that it's cleared from the system very rapidly. So if we were trying to develop these against targets for chronic diseases and trying to develop them and translate them into therapeutics for human health, they needed to have an extended systemic exposure. They needed to last longer in the body, in essence. And so this molecule that we called Endure, which was the anti-albumin binding domain, had that capacity. So we identified the potential of that to integrate into our platform, to expand the potential for us developing therapeutics. And also, as a standalone asset, it potentially had licensing opportunities to customers like pharma companies as well. Now, we did multiple different things during our Super Follow-on Fund, which enabled not only the technology itself, but the broader platform as well. So we had multiple shots on goal, but we were focused. This is really critical, and this is what David just mentioned, is that we had a defined path, a defined critical path to develop this molecule, to get it to a clinical candidate, but also through that, we had to go through humanization, because these molecules are not mammalian, they come from a non-mammalian source. And so during that process, we managed to identify the key lead, the clinical candidate. The humanization was critical, not just for Endure, but right across the whole platform. And it still is critical for us. And we have a methodology, and we also have a patent protected against that methodology, which is key. The words in the third line, ADA, are anti-drug antibodies and pharmacokinetic assay workup. So we had to do that in order to ensure that the molecule we were working on worked and extended the half-life of other molecules, as I said at the start. So that methodology was absolutely critical, and that methodology gets rolled out for late-stage development of all of our subsequent therapeutics. We also looked at manufacturing. So that was the first time we'd involved anybody in assessing that to see and determine whether or not it was capable of scale-up, which is critical for a biological-based therapeutic. But at the same time, and really importantly, as much as the biology is exciting, the science is exciting, the technical side is exciting, you've got to think about the commercial planning. So right the way through the whole process, right the way through that development plan, we were building a commercial plan. And that started by determining the advantages of the molecule, where we could crack into the market opportunity, which customers we needed to engage with, when we engage with them, at what point, and what we said about the molecule. And also about investor engagement as well. Our project was 18 months old, and we needed to use that as a springboard to translate this into an investable asset that we could then get investment, and then we could then start a company on the back of the technology. Can you put the next slide on, please, Faye? So, I mean, we've benefited hugely. Like I said at the start, the BBSRC Super Follow-on Fund was a catalyst to success for our technology platform and the translatability of it into something that was commercially viable. What I also, and I was very delighted to receive, was a BBSRC funded Royal Society of Edinburgh Fellowship. So we've been supported there. That developed myself as an individual who was very much in a kind of academic setting to become a bit more business savvy and to understand all the kind of nuances of business and how to integrate the technology into a commercial setting. We also built collaborations, and as David said, if you can identify them as you're putting together your application, those are really useful. Those are validation of the technology or the service. They could provide you with support if you don't have the facilities to do that. These are really important people, and they could potentially be customers at the end of the day as well, actually. So you're engaging them at a really early stage. We spun the company out in 2016 on the back of a convertible loan from the Scottish National Investment Bank. So the funding literally for the BBSRC funding was literally running out at the end of 2015. I managed to win a small award, which enabled me then to get over the Christmas barrier into February, and we managed to finalize the funding and we spun the company out. I was employee number 3. And then we won a number of awards along the way, which are great. They're not critical, but it's really nice to just get that kind of accolade with all the hard work that the team does. And also just to shine the light on BBSRC and other UKRI funding to show that it is fundamentally important to translate academic research into something that could be commercially really valuable. To date, yeah, I've been quite busy. So we've brought in probably closer to 20 million in investment, and that's all different shapes and forms of investment, from equity to other grants and supporting different systems and collaborative research opportunities as well. So some of the collaborators we've had, like Amgen, for example, we gain some funding through that to do the research work. So there's lots of different ways that you can engage with customers to get revenue, early stage revenue into the company, and then to add value to the technology as well. And as I sit here today, I'm very proud to say we've got a team of 15 on the ground, and also a fantastic board. And it's a really exciting time for the company. And when I look back, and I'm delighted that Faye and David invited me to speak today, because when I look back, I realized that this actually was the starting point of it. So I have a huge deal to be thankful for the BBSRC Follow-on Fund. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Caroline. That was a really great talk. Yeah, it's really nice to get someone in who's definitely made a success out of follow-on funding, and it's helped them in their future sort of company development. What sort of, if you don't mind me asking you a couple of questions, sort of what would be the main bit of advice you would give to someone who is thinking about applying for follow-on funding?
Yes, it's to really delve into thinking about where your technology or what it is you're developing fits in the marketplace. And that's really challenging sometimes, because you may have thoughts yourself about the science is fantastic, it's exciting, it's really great. But if there's not a desire for it, if there's not a market for it, then it's difficult to make that translation fit. And sometimes the first things you think about, which may be what you think would be the greatest opportunity, aren't always the ones that end up being the case. And so I would delve in as best you can to look at what's happening, as you said, to test the market if possible, to reach out to some of your customers. And customer, the word customer is kind of an unusual word, actually, because to me, it's not always obvious who your customers are. So my customers are probably big pharma, small to medium-sized biotech, but also actually investors. I mean, they're customers as well, because ultimately you're trying to sell something to them to get them to invest. So just kind of think about the bigger picture, think about how it fits. And the other key thing, as far as my experience on being on the committee as well, is really think about that development plan. Again, you made great points when you were putting the slide deck together about ambition is good, right? Don't ever reduce the ambition, but it has to be realistic. And so you can't do everything. Up 2 years of time sounds like a lot when you first get grant funding in, but it's not a long time when you really start digging down into the kind of work that you need done. So ensure that the timelines, the development plan, the Gantt chart is doable, as I suppose is the best word. But also, as you go through that process, think about the risks. Think about what if that didn't work? What's the plan B? How can I initiate that plan B to have some overlap to make it the most expedient process possible, so that I don't lose any time, but I've got that backup plan in place? And be honest about the risks, because we all know that technology and innovation is risky. This is why we invest in it, because it's exciting. But be honest about it, and just always ensure you have a method or a means of mitigating that risk. And to kind of wrap that development plan and that risk mitigation plan around the right team, because you've also got to indicate who's going to deliver on this as well. And so the right people who have the right capabilities and the right commitment will get the job done.
That's great. Thank you so much. think we'll move on to the Q&A section now. We've had a few questions in there. Helen's gonna drive that one. Please, if you've got any more questions, start putting them in the chat now. We'll try and address as many as possible. Anything that we can't address, we will follow up an email on any particular points. So yeah, get typing away if you've got a question now, and we'll start the Q&A. I'll hand over to Helen.
Thank you. Just before we start, just to say, if some of your questions are quite applicant or project specific, we will try and answer them in general senses now. But if we can ask you to email in with your specific queries, then we can answer those to the best of our ability via email. So let's kick off then. So we've got a question regarding whether somebody is allowed to apply to both FOF and an internal IAA funding. Presuming that means with the same project.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that one. So yeah, you can have both, but in order to apply for the follow-on fund in the first place, you need to have had that prior link. So you can't be applying for follow-on fund and an internal IAA that are gonna be on the same project if you haven't got either of them yet, if that makes sense. So one needs to come before the other. I mean, if you've already got other funding that's eligible for follow-on fund, then yes, you can have a follow-on fund and an IAA, but there definitely needs to be something in place prior to you making the application to follow-on fund that solidifies your link to prior BBSRC funding.
Okay, we've got a related one here actually. So I can just read this one quickly. So in terms of an overlap, the follow-on fund would be granted after the IAE. Is that a problem? That might be something we need to do via email, but what's something you can consider?
Okay, so I think we might need to take this one offline just to work out the exact timings. So yeah, if it's overlapping, but if you're already on the IAA and you're making an application to follow-on fund, then that is okay. You can reference current funding that you've got at the moment, and you're working on a project that's IAA funded, and you can be writing a follow-on fund application that's eligible. So yeah, it can be live, but there needs to be a considerable amount of work done on that particular IAA to warrant you making a follow-on fund application, and that will come in by you having to make follow-on fund application anyway, because certain questions will lead you to have certain answers prepared already that will come from that prior funding. But if there's any more that you want to ask regarding that, please feel free to email the office and we can talk to you regarding it more specifically.
Got a question here regarding when you mentioned about the benefits to the UK being important. So if the company that they work with is international or overseas, and that potentially means the benefits will not necessarily be primarily to the UK, that make them ineligible. So perhaps if we can just clarify a little bit around that benefit to the UK, if you can, please.
Sure, I can answer that. So it's absolutely fine for you to work with international partners. It has to be a clear reason for why you're doing that, and not working with partners within the UK that may be able to provide the same sort of support or partnership. But it's fine for you to do that. The question around applicability to the UK. So we recognize that actually there does need to be a link to the UK and a link to the outcomes of the project being of benefit to the UK. We do recognize that opportunities beyond the UK are there too. And so the balance is that you need to just clearly articulate how that benefits the UK, but also you can recognize that, yes, there will be opportunities elsewhere, such as in Europe or the US or other markets. So it is yeah, that is fine, but you have to make sure you clearly articulate how that comes through and how that balances out.
Thank you. So I've got a question here regarding eligibility. So are SME partners eligible to receive funding from the grant?
So that falls back to our standard rules around collaborations, and there are instances where you can have a subcontract with a company to help provide support to the projects in that fashion. But as a project partner, you wouldn't be expect a project partner to receive funds from the grant. There is also, and I would say go to the collaborations page that Jane has kindly posted in the chat, that there is a dual roles situation that is allowed. So do have a read of those specific areas of around collaborations in there, and if there is a SME partner involved, that is required to help you move things forward in terms of subcontracting, but also you see the benefit of them being as a project partner. Have a look at the dual roles section of that guidance.
Okay, thank you. So the next question we've got is regarding start date of the project. So is there, or what is the anticipated earliest start date for projects?
So I can only give a sort of a general answer to this. I recognize that some certain projects have to start at certain times because of, say, growing cycles, etc., or growing seasons. So I would say that when the committee meeting takes place, we usually seek to inform applicants of the outcome within 1 or 2 months of that meeting. And then following that, there's a process for us to go through of awarding through our system, and that can take a couple of two maybe 3 weeks, depending on the number of applications we've got to go through. And so I would say a start date probably makes the most sense being at the earliest, probably 2 maybe 3 months after the meeting date. The meeting dates will be put online, so that you'll have an idea of the meeting date within the next month or so. But in any case, we can move start dates if we need to, if you've put in an early start date, but actually we can actually adjust that later on if that's applicable or necessary. Do let us know.
Thank you. Then we've got a couple of questions about the eligibility of previous BBSRC funding. So first of all, how recent does the previous BBSRC funding need to be?
We haven't set a time limit on how recent it needs to be. Obviously, it needs to be relevant to the project that's been applied for through follow-on funds, so it needs to have supported the development to date of that project. But we haven't set a timescale for a reason, just recognizing that it's hard to define. So yeah, as long as it's related to the project that you are taking forward, then it is eligible.
I would add that, so absolutely correct, that the committee will look at time to market as well. So you have to have a good idea as part of that whole, what's the opportunity, you have a good understanding of the market that you're entering into. And so are there other technologies out there addressing a similar or maybe even the same thing that you're addressing? And if the time has been quite far back from when you've been doing that work, you need to have a good idea of what's happening now.
Okay, thank you. Then more specifically, an example, would BBSRC FTMA previous awardee, would they be eligible for the FOF?
I'm happy to answer that one as well. Yeah, as long as it's related to the project itself, rather than, it can't be an individual who's had a change of project that was on an FTMA, for instance. It needs to be related to the project specifically. So yeah, as long as it's BBSR funding and it's related to the project, it's eligible to apply.
And again, perhaps we can reiterate at that point as well. Again, if you've got specific previous funding you want to ask about, then do email in, because it's better to know about that before you apply. So moving on then, someone's asking if there is a historic success rate of the applications.
I could give a general number. obviously it depends on how many applications we get into a round, and that fluctuates. So the success rate generally is higher than responsive mode because we get less applications than we would in responsive mode. So we would say our success rate is around 30%. And like I say, it fluctuates between that higher or lower depending on the number of applications and the budget in the round.
Thank you. Then we've got a question to do with eligible costs. So is it possible to apply for the costs of IP protection?
So funding from the follow-on fund cannot be used to fund the cost of IP protection, no.
Is there, given obviously the limit of 800,000 FEC and the overall budget, is there any preferential for funding smaller proposals?
No. No, it's not. It's purely based around the strengths of each proposal, and that's something we hold very clearly in our guidance to our assessors, and that is purely around the strength of the project. And so, yeah, that's not a thing that happens.
I'm just a little unsure about the meaning of this last question, so if I can just ask the person who's posed that either to email in about that, or if you can repose that question, IAA, get the letters right, projects, then hopefully we can answer that for you. So either now or via email, then would be great. Thank you. Other than that, that's the end of the questions I can see at the moment. So maybe if anybody's got any more they want to ask, they can type those in now. So we'll just give a couple of minutes in case any more come in. Otherwise, we've got that email address, prof@bbsrc.ukri.org. And obviously we can answer those questions whenever you've got those via email. Just give it a few minutes just in case anybody does come back with anything else.
No, I don't know if we can. Oh, there's one. I was just about to say, should we close there? Is the focus always on new technologies? I'm happy to answer this one, David, if you want to come in as well. It doesn't have to be a new technology. No, it needs to be innovative, yes, and new and sort of in this not new in the sense of a new technology, but an innovative idea, maybe a different type of the same technology that is going to be disruptive to the market potentially. David, do you want to add on to this question potentially? Yeah,
sure. It's I think one of the questions that the committee would look at is, okay, if this is a development on the current technology, how is it better? What are the steps you've taken to actually make this thing stand up on its own? What is its unique selling point? So it comes down to all those really key market questions around what does this actually do and how does it benefit the end user more so than what's already available. So I think that would be the key thing, and so I think I think that answers the question. Really, it comes down to looking at what the market will say about the incremental step you're taking on a current technology.
And then we've just got one last one. Can project partners be different between the original funding and the follow-on funding application? Just to clarify there, I don't know whether we're meaning specifically project partners or whether we're also meaning included applicants in that question. So if you could maybe clarify.
Yeah, no problem. I think I've interpreted the question to say that if they've had project partners in a previous piece of work that they've been doing, can they take forward an innovation or translation project with different partners? And the answer is yes, you can.
Thank you. I can't see any more at the moment, so perhaps there's time to draw that to a close. But obviously, again, we can have any questions by email whenever those reps come in.
Okay, yeah, sure. I'm happy to bring it to a close. Just want to say thank you to Helen and Jane and David, and especially Caroline for coming on the call and explaining a little bit more about her experience of Follow-on Fund. Thank you to everyone that's joined the webinar today. And yeah, like we keep on saying, just email us. We're always happy to get email inquiries. We try and respond, you know, as soon as possible. So yeah, just keep in touch and hopefully see you at the application and assessment phase. Thank you, everyone.